It never occurred to me, not in a million years, that my father's incredible foresight, his meticulous planning, would ultimately cause our family to fall apart. This isn't just a story about a house. It's about betrayal, legacy, and the true cost of standing your ground. There's a lot to unpack here, and I want you to understand the full weight of it, the raw emotion behind every choice. So let's rewind to the beginning. My dad was a force of nature. More than just a parent, he was my mentor, my hero. A senior software architect myself now, I often feel I'm walking in his very footsteps, even though his world was solid steel and concrete, not lines of code. Technology is the future, he'd beam, his eyes sparkling with an almost childlike pride after I got into UW's computer science program. He might not have been a techie, but he had this uncanny ability to predict trends, to see around corners, a vision that always amazed me. He built his construction business from nothing, starting with just a pickup truck and his tools during the tough late 80s recession. Mom used to talk about how they lived so frugally back then, in a tiny apartment. But Dad, he had this unwavering faith in his vision. The key is to build relationships, not just buildings, he'd always say. And he lived that truth. His approach was truly unique. Open pricing, truthful schedules, even if it meant losing bids to rivals making outlandish promises. First, establish trust. He'd advise, the profits will follow. And they did. His business became renowned in Seattle for tackling these intricate restoration projects, places that demanded both technical skill and a profound historical sensitivity. And when the 2008 financial crisis hit, while other companies crumbled, Dad's business didn't just survive, it thrived. He didn't fire a single employee. Instead, he slashed his own income to zero, even took out a second mortgage on his cherished Mustang just to keep his team afloat. That, right there, taught me more about leadership, about true character, than any management course ever could. It was a masterclass in integrity. Your employees are your extended family, he'd tell me, his voice firm with conviction. You take care of them, they'll take care of your business. I didn't fully grasp then how deeply his philosophy would influence my own career. Years later, when I became a team lead at my software company, I found myself implementing so many of his ideas. Thorough documentation, fostering strong relationships within my development team. It was all Dad. It was my junior year, at a hackathon, where I met Emily. She was studying business administration, helping plan the event. I was probably a sleep-deprived, energy-drink-fueled mess, but somehow, she found my love for Coach Charming. Dad fell for her immediately. She grounds you, he told me after their first dinner. Don't let this one get away. After college, he even helped Emily launch her own marketing firm, connecting her to his network, showing her how he drafted contracts. Success isn't just about what you know, he'd say. It's about helping others succeed too. He was always sharing his wisdom. Those early years were something special. Every Sunday, Emily and I would drive to my parents' house for dinner, a sacred ritual we cherished. We'd sit on the back deck Dad built, the scent of grilling meat in the air, talking about everything and nothing. He'd ask me about my latest tech projects, truly engaged, even if he couldn't understand half the jargon. Mom would just smile, rolling her eyes lovingly. There they go again with the computer talk. But you could see the pride in her eyes too. But Dad's true pride and joy, his masterpiece, was the house itself. He purchased it with the proceeds from his first big historical restoration project in the 90s, the one that didn't just put his business on the map, but solidified his reputation. This beautiful craftsman-style home in an older Seattle neighborhood, with its inviting wraparound porch and a garage he'd transformed into the most organized workshop you've ever seen. Every single tool had its precise place, labeled, arranged with an almost fanatical, loving precision. He didn't just own that house. He treated it like a living example of his unparalleled skill, meticulously documenting every repair, every improvement, every fresh coat of paint in a detailed spreadsheet he maintained religiously. A house is like a living thing, he'd explain, patiently demonstrating for me how to clean gutters or inspect the foundation. Neglect the little things, and they become big problems. The workshop wasn't just his haven, it was our classroom. He'd renovated it himself, adding custom storage, a workbench just for teaching me woodworking. Every piece of wood has its own story, he'd say as we worked. The pegboard wall, with outlines for each tool, wasn't just about organization. It was his method of teaching me that everything has a place and a purpose. Our job is to help tell that story. In that garage, we spent countless weekends, Dad and I, working on his 1967 Mustang. He bought it when I was 12, a restoration project. He said that would strengthen our bond as father and son. That car became a life lessons classroom. His advice was simple, yet profoundly impactful, shaping my entire approach to life. Always use the right tool for the job. Or, shortcuts look tempting, but they'll cost you in the long run, son. He could have finished that Mustang in a year, easily, if he'd wanted to, but it deliberately took 3. For him, the journey, the process, was everything, not just the final destination. From project management to fundamental mechanics, he patiently taught me it all. We took photos of every component, recorded every single step, kept meticulous logs of our development. This isn't just about fixing a car, he'd insist, his eyes serious. It's about learning how to break down big problems into manageable, solvable pieces. A lesson that served me incredibly well, almost daily, in my software development career. When Emily and I got married, we purchased a small home about 20 minutes from my parents' house. Dad helped us with the down payment, but he insisted the mortgage be in our names. You need to build your own credit history, he clarified. It's about standing on your own feet. On weekends, he'd come over, teaching me how to install ceiling fans, fix drywall, preparing me for the responsibilities of home ownership, even back then. My career was really taking off around this time. I just received a promotion to team lead, overseeing a team that was creating infrastructure solutions. The hours were long, the stress intense, but I loved every second of it. Dad would frequently call during my lunch breaks, just to check in, without getting into specifics. He knew the demands of managing a group and overseeing the work of others. Remember to delegate, he'd remind me. You can't do everything yourself, just like I can't build a house alone. We were discussing the possibility of starting a family when Dad first mentioned feeling constantly exhausted. Mom urged him to see a doctor, but he kept putting it off, dismissing our worries. Just working too hard, he'd say. He was on his largest project ever, a multi-million-dollar development deal that would secure his business for the ensuing 10 years. Looking back, I kick myself, even now, for not pushing harder, for not insisting he go sooner. Maybe, just maybe, with earlier detection, things could have been different. The thought still haunts me. The business was booming. He just opened a second office in Portland, expanding into historical restoration across the Pacific Northwest. It's about embracing the future while respecting the past, he'd tell his clients, always preserving the character of historic structures. This love for preservation influenced everything he did, both personally and professionally. Our last meaningful conversation was about the Mustang. We'd finished the restoration, and he was talking about taking it to car shows. We should sign up for the Pacific Northwest Classic, he said, his eyes glowing like a child. Show these youngsters what a real muscle car looks like. He was planning for the future, right up until the very end. It started like any other morning. Until it wasn't. My phone buzzed during an early meeting. I was in the middle of a critical project discussion and almost ignored it, but something compelled me to step out and answer. It was Mom. She was sobbing so hard she could barely speak. Dad had collapsed on a construction site. By the time I got to the hospital, he was gone. A sudden, massive heart attack. He was only 58. The weeks that followed were a blur of grief and endless bureaucracy. The funeral was packed, overflowing with people. His business, his deep community involvement, had touched so many lives in Seattle. Suppliers, contractors, even rival business owners came to pay their respects, a testament to his character. Everyone had a story, a personal anecdote about how Dad had helped them, given sound advice, or simply been there for them when they needed someone to confide in. One old craftsman told me how, despite being unable to work during a long, debilitating illness, Dad had managed to keep him on the payroll, paying him out of his own pocket. Your father understood that business was about people first, he stated, his voice thick with emotion. He built a legacy of caring. The company's workers were heartbroken. Many had known Dad for decades, and they shared stories I'd never heard before. How he'd paid for a foreman's daughter's college textbooks, helped another through a divorce, stayed late to teach apprentices the nuances of historical restoration. The conference room at the office turned into an unofficial monument, filled with pictures and handwritten notes from clients and employees. What truly surprised us was how meticulously Dad had prepared for everything. A week after the funeral, his attorney, Mr. Anderson, called us in for a meeting. He pulled out this enormous accordion file, neatly handwritten by Dad. Family Security Protocol. Inside were dozens of carefully arranged papers, comprehensive instructions for every aspect of his estate. Mr. Anderson walked me through it all for 3 days, each color-coded container filled with legal documents and Dad's personal notes outlining his decisions. In 35 years of practice, Mr. Anderson remarked, shaking his head slightly, I've never seen an estate plan this thorough. Dad had even included a 5-year business transition plan with backup scenarios for various circumstances. Soon after, Mom started attending a bereavement support group at her church. That's where she met Steve. He was 58, one of the group facilitators, and had lost his wife to cancer 2 years prior. At first, she just mentioned him in passing. Steve suggested this great book about healing, or Steve said it's normal to feel this way. Even if it felt a little fast, a bit soon, I was happy she was getting support, finding a path through her grief. Emily reminded me that everyone experiences grief in a unique way. Every Tuesday night, the church grief support group met. But before long, Mom and Steve were attending church functions together more often. Coffee gatherings after services turned into lunch meetings, then dinner dates. Our family friends started to worry, expressing concern about how quickly their friendship was evolving. At a family get-together, my Aunt Jane pulled me aside, because she was genuinely concerned that Mom was rushing into things, trying to fill the painful void Dad left. Mom's changes became more pronounced. A new haircut, different clothes. She even ripped out the garden Dad had helped her create, the one they'd spent so many happy hours in. Every time I asked about it, she'd simply say, "It's time for a fresh start." The woman who used to spend hours reminiscing about her life with Dad hardly ever mentioned him now. It happened faster than any of us could have anticipated. 6 months after Dad's death, Mom announced Steve was moving in. His own grown children, James, 30, and Lisa, 32, would be joining them. "It'll bring life back into the house," she'd said. I tried to be sympathetic, to understand, but it felt like she was in a desperate, almost frantic rush to replace everything Dad had built, to erase his presence. I found myself at a profound crossroads, torn. How could I honor Dad's tangible legacy, everything he poured his soul into, without jeopardizing Mom's fragile chance at happiness? Emily, always my voice of reason, urged me to find a delicate balance, but all I could hear was Dad's voice, a whisper from a letter he'd left. "Son, preserve those memories first. They are the true foundation." So, 3 months passed since I last shared this with anyone, and things only spiraled further, from bad to unbelievably worse. Steve's domineering presence, which used to just bother me, now felt like an outright hostile takeover. He acted as though he owned the house my dad left to me. Last month, without a single word of permission, Steve decided to launch a significant restoration project. I visited one weekend, only to find contractors tearing out the built-in bookshelves my dad had lovingly crafted for the living room. These weren't just shelves. These were the last project Dad and I worked on together, side by side, before he became ill. They held countless memories, silent stories of laughter and shared purpose. Steve stood there, overseeing them with a chilling detachment, directing them to just throw all this old wood in the dumpster, as if it were nothing more than worthless trash. I confronted him, my anger simmering, barely contained. He looked at me, a condescending smirk on his face. "Look, son," he emphasized, with that patronizing tone, "this house needs to be brought into the 21st century. Your father's taste was, well, dated. We're doing you a favor by increasing the property value." I reminded him, quite clearly, that any modifications legally required my consent. He just chuckled, a dismissive sound. "Your mother and I live here," he scoffed. "We don't need permission to improve our home." Mom, standing right there, nodded in agreement, her face blank. "Steve knows about these things," she said. "He's just trying to help." The very woman who used to lovingly arrange her antique teacup collection on those shelves, who adored them at Christmas, now acted as though they were just taking up space. I showed her Dad's meticulous house maintenance plans, but she waved them away, dismissing them as dwelling in the past. And it wasn't just Steve. The relationship with his children had completely unraveled too. While I was away on a business trip, James took over Dad's workshop, transforming it into his personal CrossFit gym. He even held a garage sale and sold the majority of Dad's tools, the tools we'd spent years collecting, the tools he taught me to use. Lisa, meanwhile, was treating the entire house like her personal design project, repainting rooms and installing modern vinyl planks right over Dad's meticulously refinished hardwood floors. It felt like a deliberate act of erasure, a conscious dismantling of everything my father had painstakingly created. My stomach churned with a mix of fury and profound sadness. One evening, after dinner, Steve pulled me aside. "Since we're paying to live here," he declared, with an air of entitlement, "we should have our names on the deed. It's only fair." I had to explain, through gritted teeth, that they don't pay a mortgage. Dad's planning had paid for the house in full. They didn't even cover rent. All the maintenance expenses, insurance, and property taxes? That was me, every single penny. Emily, bless her heart, suggested we stop our weekly visits, especially now that our daughter Emma was here. She was right, the stress in that house was toxic, eating away at us. But stepping back only emboldened Steve further. He started sending me bills for improvements I never approved, and these unauthorized projects became more frequent, more brazen. Mom's sister called me recently, lecturing me about being more sympathetic to Mom's new life. I tried to explain Dad's intentions, my legal obligations, but she just accused me of being trapped in the past. "Steve makes her happy," she demanded, her voice sharp. "Why can't you just let them make the house their own?" The final straw this week, it felt like a dagger to my heart. The growth markers. From ages 3 to 18, every single birthday, Dad would stand me against that kitchen door frame, measure my height, and write the date next to each mark in a steady hand. They were gone, sanded away, removed. When I confronted Mom, her face was devoid of any emotion, completely blank. "It's just an old door frame," she said, her voice flat. "We can't keep every piece of wood just because your father touched it." It was like she was erasing me, too, erasing our history. Now, I spend more time than I'd like to admit sitting alone in Dad's old armchair, the only piece of furniture I managed to save, now relegated to my own garage. It's my only connection to him there. Mr. Anderson, seeing my turmoil, wisely advised me to start thinking about long-term solutions. Legally, the house was unequivocally mine, but I knew I was facing some incredibly difficult choices about its destiny. When does preserving your father's legacy, upholding his final wishes, become more important than being the bad guy in everyone else's eyes? And how, I wondered, do you defend the moral high ground when your entire family is actively, vehemently against you? This question haunted me, a constant, heavy weight. And hey, if you're as stunned by all this as I was, and you want to hear more stories like mine, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. Trust me, it only gets wilder from here. The situation reached a boiling point. I finally made a choice that would, without a doubt, change everything. Last week, I spoke with my financial advisor about the house. Property values nearby had soared by 40% in just 3 years, meaning the house could generate a substantial rental income, enough to cover Emma's future college fund. In that discussion, it hit me. I'd been so consumed by the sentimental value, I completely overlooked the massive financial implications of letting Mom and Steve live there rent-free. When I brought this up during our weekly conversation, Mom exploded. "You can't do this to us!" She shrieked into the phone, her voice laced with fury. "This is where we call home. Steve has worked really hard on it." She refused to listen as I tried to explain I was just considering my options. She just kept talking about all their enhancements, utterly disregarding the fact that I had never, ever approved any of them. An hour later, Steve called. He was furious, but his usual arrogant demeanor was gone, replaced by a desperate edge. "Listen here," he announced, his voice tight. "We've established a life in this house. You're just missing your father. You can't walk in and ruin everything." When I tried to explain the financial issues, he cut me off, claiming they had sweat equity in the property. I calmly reminded him, the house belonged to me legally. There's a reason why Dad left it to me. He scoffed. "Your father isn't here anymore. You must consider the living." I talked it over with Emily, and then Mr. Anderson. The decision was made. The very next day, I arrived at the house. Mom and Steve were in the dining room, engrossed in yet another remodeling job. They had started ripping out the original crown molding Dad had specifically milled to blend with the house's antique style. That image solidified my resolve, crystallizing everything I needed to do. "You have 2 weeks to find another place to live," I told them, my voice steady despite the trembling inside. Mom instantly burst into tears, accusing me of being callous and harsh. Steve tried to scare me, arguing I couldn't just throw them out on the street. He began enumerating all their local ties, his job, their church, their neighborhood friends. But I stood my ground, firm and composed, just as my father had taught me when facing challenging circumstances. "This is my property," I declared, my gaze unwavering. "Dad left it to me for a reason, and I'm exercising my legal right as the owner." Steve's cheeks flushed a deep red, a vein throbbing in his temple. He started listing all the money they'd supposedly spent on upgrades. I informed him, coldly, that these unapproved alterations had actually diminished the historical value of the property, making them liabilities, not assets. Things got even worse when Lisa came home and joined the debate. Mom immediately used her pregnancy as emotional leverage. "How can you treat your stepsister in this way?" she wailed, her voice cracking. "She's having a child." While Lisa's pregnancy was, of course, significant to them, I had to remind them it didn't affect my property rights. And she wasn't my stepsister. Since then, it's been an ongoing assault of emotional manipulation. Mom's entire family banded together against me. Her sister called, sobbing, claiming their parents wanted to make sure Mom was safe. Steve's brother, a local real estate agent, left long messages about the challenging rental market and how difficult it would be for them. Even distant cousins I barely knew started sending lengthy messages about Christian ideals and family loyalty, twisting scripture to fit their narrative. The hardest part was dealing with family friends, people who had known me since I was a child, who had seen me grow up. They called, expressing their disappointment in my decisions. Every call felt like another tiny betrayal, chipping away at my resolve. Some even claimed I was damaging Dad's standing in the neighborhood. The problem is, this has nothing to do with cruelty or profit. This is about honoring Dad's desires and preserving the things he created, the very essence of his being. It has been agonizing enough to watch them methodically destroy all traces of him. The house was his legacy. I paid for all their expenses, allowed them to live rent-free for years, put up with their unapproved changes. Eventually, enough is enough. They had 2 weeks to come up with new plans. I refused to give in to Mom's constant demands for more time. Mr. Anderson confirmed the law was entirely on my side, and that I had been more than generous, beyond reasonable. He helped me draft official paperwork for the notice to vacate, ensuring everything was meticulously documented, leaving no room for argument. I knew this made me the villain in everyone else's story, the heartless son, but sometimes, standing up for what's right requires making difficult choices, even when others passionately disagree. That, above all else, was a lesson I learned from my dad. The 2-week deadline I set for Mom and Steve finally passed. Those 2 weeks were the longest of my life. filled with relentless guilt-tripping, continual emotional manipulation, and progressively frantic attempts to get me to change my mind. Mom did everything. Every day, she called, oscillating between furious demands and tearful pleas. One day she'd say, "I changed your diapers." The next, she'd scream, "I gave up everything for you." Steve also changed tactics, trying to negotiate instead of intimidate. He suggested establishing a formal lease, offered to start paying rent. But after what they'd done to Dad's house, the deliberate destruction of his legacy, I simply couldn't trust them to uphold any agreements we made. Their word meant nothing to me anymore. 3 days before the deadline, I arrived at the house to find a crowd gathered on the front lawn. Mom had enlisted the help of friends from church, family, and even some of Dad's former business partners. They had prepared statements about moral commitments and family responsibilities, what amounted to an intervention, a public shaming. I sat there for 2 agonizing hours, listening to people criticize me for being a bad son, for lacking compassion. Mom's pastor lectured me on honoring your parents, quoting scripture. Dad's old secretary, a woman who'd known me since I was a child, recalled his generosity with tears in her eyes, twisting it to serve their narrative. Even my elementary school teacher showed up, a ghost from the past, reminding me of the morals my father had tried to instill in me, now used as a weapon against me. The hardest part, the true gut punch, was when Lisa stood up, hands clasped over her visibly pregnant abdomen, talking about how the stress I was causing could hurt her unborn child, while Mom openly sobbed next to her. A few of the church women glared at me, their faces a mask of silent, righteous judgment. It was an expertly choreographed lesson in emotional manipulation, designed to break me. But then, during this ambush, something unexpected happened. As I sat there, listening to everyone talk about Dad, people who hadn't even bothered to show up at his funeral, suddenly professing to know what he would have wanted, I felt a strange sense of serenity, a calm resolve settling deep within me. "Hold your ground when you know you're right," Dad used to say, and I could almost hear his voice in my head, strong and clear. I stood up, my legs feeling surprisingly steady, my voice ringing clear and calm in the tense silence. I addressed the group, looking each person in the eye, unflinching. I described how Dad, my meticulous, loving father, had planned everything so carefully, not just for his business, but to ensure his family's future. How he had built this very house, brick by brick, with his own hands and his boundless heart. Then, I didn't just tell them, I showed them. I pulled out my phone and presented pictures, irrefutable evidence of Steve's unapproved modifications, the historical elements he'd thoughtlessly ruined, the fine craftsmanship he'd ripped out and replaced with flimsy, cheap modern fixtures. After that, I presented them with a letter from Dad himself, a physical manifestation of his foresight, outlining his explicit reasons for leaving everything to me, specifically the house. As I read his powerful remarks about trust, accountability, and preserving his legacy, some of the older business associates, men who had known and respected my father for decades, nodded slowly, almost imperceptibly. They understood. They had known Dad, really known him, beyond the superficial stories. Shortly after, the group scattered. Some looked disapproving, yes, but the righteous wrath had subsided. Others gently apologized as they walked away, murmuring their regrets. Mom and Steve, without another word, went back inside defeated. On the morning of the deadline, Mr. Anderson, a locksmith, and I showed up. I'd even hired a security company to be on hand, just in case, though they weren't required. The house was deserted, an eerie silence hanging in the air. Their remaining possessions were packed into Steve's truck. Mom refused to look at me as Steve helped Lisa into his pickup. He couldn't help but deliver one last jab, one final attempt to wound me. "You're happy with yourself," he sneered, his voice dripping with venom. "Your father would be so proud of how you've treated your mother." I didn't answer. Dad would have known. I know he had prepared for this possibility. What other reason could he have had for being so explicit in his will? After they left, I walked through the house, a profound sadness mixing with a quiet sense of triumph. I had underestimated the extent of the harm. Builder-grade materials replaced original fittings. Dad's handcrafted woodwork, which we'd spent so many weekends perfecting in the workshop, had been painted over or simply taken out, leaving gaping holes. The workshop itself was completely changed, unrecognizable. I have no intention of pursuing damages for the emotional toll or the physical destruction, but Mr. Anderson meticulously documented everything for any future legal considerations. I simply want to close this painful, soul-crushing chapter behind me and concentrate on fixing what can be fixed, on rebuilding a home, not just a house. Already, some of Dad's old craftsman friends, men who revered him, have reached out, eager to assist in restoring the architectural features that were so carelessly ripped away. For now, Mom is staying with her sister. The majority of my relatives have stopped talking to me altogether, though some still call to chastise me, or post their judgment on social media. Steve's children continue to share heartbreaking updates about their poor mother being thrown out of her home, but fewer and fewer people are responding to each post. Their narrative is losing its power. Through it all, Emily has been my unwavering rock, my steadfast pillar of support. Whenever I start to doubt myself, whenever the accusations echo in my mind, she reminds me of Dad's letter, of his implicit faith in my ability to make the right choices, to uphold his values. She reminds me who I am. Eventually, I will tell Emma, my daughter, all about her amazing grandfather, about the incredible man he was, and the precious heritage he attempted to preserve. But she's too little to truly comprehend the depth of what's occurring right now, the painful sacrifices made. My last update to you all will be this one. I'm collaborating with a restoration professional to bring the house back to its original state. We can preserve the spirit of what Dad made, his incredible vision, but it won't be perfect. Some things can't be reversed. The workshop, that hallowed space where I learned so much from my father, that will be the first place we restore. I want my daughter to learn there too, to understand the value of craftsmanship and integrity. Sometimes, being the villain in someone else's distorted tale is the unavoidable price of doing the right thing, of upholding your principles. I may never be able to fully rebuild the familial relationships I lost. Those fractured bonds may be beyond repair, but I can live with the profound satisfaction that I preserved what my father trusted me with. As Dad used to say, his words echoing in my memory, integrity is about doing the right thing, even when it hurts, and not about taking the easy route, son. I believe, deep in my heart, he would comprehend my choice. This will be my last update on this intensely personal journey. Thank you all, truly, for your incredible support and for bearing witness. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever had to choose between family peace and standing up for what's right? Tell me what you think in the comments below. I really want to know.